The Tankas or boat people are an ethnic subgroup in southern China who have traditionally lived on junks in coastal parts of Guangdong, Guangxi, Fujian, Hainan, and Zhejiang, as well as Hong Kong and Macau, though many now live on shore. Some from the older generations still live on the narrow boats and pursue the traditional livelihood of fishing. Historically, the Tankas were considered to be outcasts. Since they were boat people who lived by the sea, they were sometimes referred to as sea gypsies by the Chinese and British. Tanka origins can be traced back to the native ethnic minorities of southern China who may have taken refuge on the sea and gradually assimilated into Han culture. However, Tanka have preserved many of the native traditions that are not found in Han Chinese culture. A small number of Tankas also live in parts of Vietnam. They are called Dan and are classified as a subgroup of the Gai ethnicity. Note on the term. The term Tanka is now considered derogatory and no longer in common use. These boat dwellers are now referred to in China as on-water people or people of the Southern Sea. No standardized English translation of this term exists. Boat people is a commonly used translation, although it may be confused with the similar term that applies to Vietnamese refugees in Hong Kong. The term boat dwellers was proposed by Dr. Lee Ho-yin of the University of Hong Kong in 1999, and it has been adopted by the Hong Kong Museum of History for its permanent exhibition. Both the Tanka and the Cantonese speak the Cantonese language. However, Tanka living in Fujian speaks Hokkien Min Chinese. Boat people was a general category for both the Tanka and the Hokklo, who also made their living on boats. They spoke different dialects, and the Hokklo originated from Fujian. The Hokklo used the term Hokklo to refer to themselves, while the name Tanka was used only by Cantonese to describe the Tanka. There were two distinct categories of people based on the way of life, and they were further divided into different groups. The Hakka and Cantonese lived on land, the Tanka and Hokklo lived on boats and were both classified as boat people. The differences between the sea-dwelling Tanka and land dwellers were not based merely on the way of life. Cantonese and Hakka who lived on land fished sometimes for a living, but these land fishermen never mixed or married with the Tanka fishermen. Tanka were barred from Cantonese and Hakka celebrations. British reports on Hong Kong described the Tanka and Hokklo living in Hong Kong since time unknown. The Encyclopedia Americana described Hokklo and Tanka as living in Hong Kong since prehistoric times. Prehistory. Mythical origins. Some Chinese myths claimed that animals were the ancestors of the barbarians, including the Tanka people. Some ancient Chinese sources claimed that water snakes were the ancestors of the Tanka, saying that they could last for 3 days in the water, without breathing air. Baiu connection and origins. In southern China, the Tanka are considered by some scholars to be related to other minority peoples of southern China, such as the Yun Li people. The Amoy University anthropologist Ling Huixiang wrote on his theory of the Fujian Tanka being descendants of the Baiu. He claimed that Guangdong and Fujian Tanka are definitely descended from the old Baiu peoples, and that they may have been ancestors of the Malay race. The Tanka inherited their lifestyle and culture from the original Yu peoples who inhabited Hong Kong during the Neolithic era. After the first emperor of China conquered Hong Kong, groups from northern and central China moved into the general area of Guangdong, including Hong Kong. One theory proposes that the ancient Zhou inhabitants of southern China are the ancestors of the modern Tanka boat people. The majority of Western academics subscribe to this theory, and use Chinese historical sources. The Oxford English Dictionary, 2nd edition, states that the ancestors of the Tanka were native people. The Tankas' ancestors had been pushed to the southern coast by Chinese peasants who took over the land. During the British colonial era in Hong Kong, the Tanka were considered a separate ethnic group from the Punti, Hakka and Hoklo. Punti is another name for Cantonese, who came from mainly Guangdong districts. The Hakka and Hoklo are not considered as Puntis. The Tanka are compared to the Shi people by some historians, practicing Han Chinese culture, while being an ethnic minority descended from natives of southern China. Zhao Connections Chinese scholars and gazettes describe the Tanka as a Zhao tribe, with some other sources noting that Tan people lived at Lantau, and other sources saying Zhao people lived there. As a result, they refused to obey the salt monopoly of the Song dynasty Chinese government. The County Gazetteer of Sun On in 1729 described the Tanka as Zhao barbarians, and the Tanka were viewed as animals. Wolfram Eberhard suggested that the Yue are related to the Tanka, that the Chinese admixture in the Tanka is due to the Tanka prostitutes serving Chinese, and that the Tanka replaced their own culture with Chinese culture, including the Chinese language. In modern times, the Tanka claim to be ordinary Chinese who happen to fish for a living, and the local dialect is used as the language. Historiography Some southern Chinese historic views of the Tanka were that they were a separate aboriginal ethnic group, not Han Chinese at all. Chinese imperial records also claimed that the Tanka were descendants of aboriginals. Tanka were also accused of being sea gypsies. The Tanka were regarded as Yue and not Chinese. They were divided into three classifications: the fish Tan, the oyster Tan, and the wood Tan, the 1100s, based on what they did for a living. The three groups of Punti, Hakka, and Hoklo, all of whom spoke different Chinese dialects, despised and fought each other during the late Qing dynasty. However, they were all united in their overwhelming hatred for the Tanka, since the aboriginals of southern China were the ancestors of the Tanka. The Cantonese Punti had displaced the Tanka aboriginals after they began conquering southern China. The Chinese poet Su Dongpo wrote a poem in which mentioned the Tanka. The Nankai University of Tianjin published the Nankai Social and Economic Quarterly, Volume 9 in 1936, and it referred to the Tanka as aboriginal descendants before Chinese assimilation. The scholar Jacques Garnett also wrote that the Tanka were aboriginals who were known for being pirates, which hindered Qing dynasty attempts to assert control in Guangdong. Scholarly opinions on Baiu connection. The most widely held theory is that the Tanka are the descendants of the native Yue inhabitants of Guangdong before the Han Cantonese moved in. The theory stated that originally the Yue peoples inhabited the region. When the Chinese conquest began, the Chinese either absorbed or expelled the Yue to southern regions. The Tanka, according to this theory, are descended from Yue who preserved the separate culture. A minority of scholars who challenged this theory deny that the Tanka are descended from natives, instead claiming they are basically the same as other Han Cantonese who dwell on land, claiming that neither the land-dwelling Han Cantonese nor the water-dwelling Tanka have more aboriginal blood than the other, with the Tanka boat people being as Chinese and as Han as ordinary Cantonese. Eugene Newton Anderson claimed that there was no evidence for any of the conjectures put forward by scholars on the Tanka's origins, citing Chen, who stated that to what tribe or race they once belonged or were once akin to is still unknown. Some researchers say the origin of the Tanka is multifaceted, with a portion of them having native Yue ancestors and others originating from other sources.